Hello everyone, this is the Catholic Thinker. Today what I wanted to do was kind of talk about some of the attributes, I guess is the word to use, of the God that I argued about in my video, Why I'm Catholic. I had a couple of people request that I kind of go more in depth into what characteristics slash attributes this particular God would have. Um, and I felt like it was important or necessary to go into first before I go into some of the things about the Bible and why it's written the way it is, and so on and so forth. To kind of clarify a couple of things, the first is this is metaphysics essentially. What that means is we're trying to figure out being, not beings plural, but the singular being, the being of existence. And because it's outside knowledge, or it's knowledge that we can acquire outside of the Bible telling us it is that way, I feel like a lot of people would hold a lot more precedence for this particular type of argument than anything straight from the Bible. And because of that, and this is the way that the Catholic Church tends to read it as well, it's when it's trying to justify or read a particular difficult passage that's within the Bible, it starts off from metaphysics and then moves into and tries to figure out how that particular passage in the Bible applies to the metaphysical being that we call God. So without further ado, I'm just going to get straight into it. I'm going to kind of do a quick review of the argument that I used. If you want the full one, please see my previous video, Why I'm Catholic. But it essentially goes along the lines of everything that has matter is a composite of both matter and existence. And because everything that is composite was at one point separate or added or needed those things added together, there needed to be a being that was not composite but exists. And the only possible way for that to happen is if the being was only existence. And several people kind of asked, well, how can that be when you claim that the Christian God is, loving, merciful, just? Those are different elements for it. And so I'm hoping to answer, without using the Bible, like I said, hoping to answer those challenges. Well, first, this is the being of existence. And from that, it seems pretty logically clear that this being would be the source of everything, the source of all existence. Anything that could and does exist comes directly from him. And because of that, when terms such as omnipotent, omniscient, and other words like that are attributed to God, it's not saying that everything that, or like for example for omniscient, he knows everything. It's that more along the lines of he is the source of all knowledge. He is the reason why there is knowledge in the first place. And since he is the source of all knowledge, anything that he doesn't know actually doesn't exist, because because he's the source of it, it's impossible for there to be knowledge that did not come from him. There's a YouTuber, Dark Matter, who did a video, and on it he, made the claim, well, how could God be omniscient, or even make the claim that he is omniscient, because there could be something that he doesn't know that he doesn't know. Which comes from that misunderstanding of what omniscient is. And like I said, it's more along the lines of God is the source of knowledge. If it and because he's the source of knowledge, like for example, suppose you know you go to a new planet and there is only one source of water on that planet. So every source or every water that you come across comes from that one source. It is impossible for on that planet for there to be water that came outside of that source. And it's in the same way with God. Because he's the source of all knowledge, all power, of everything like that. Nothing exists outside of that. Secondly, if he's all knowledge or all powerful, then doesn't that make him composite? Doesn't that make him have parts? Well, kind of as an example, you have the sun, and it does one act of shining or giving light to the earth. But from that one act of light, we have multiple effects. We have the sand heating up, the water evaporating, the skin getting tanned, and being able to see. So we have multiple effects from that one source or that one act. And from that, it is possible to see, and in a similar way, it's the same thing with God. He does one act, but from it we experience or notice different effects. And we attribute those effects as unique or separate in of themselves, when in actuality they are just one and the same. To kind of give an example, justice and mercy, if you really think about it, are one and the same act. If you only had justice, it's no longer justice. If you only had mercy, it's no longer mercy. In order for it to work appropriately, you need to have both justice and mercy. There was a Roman lawmaker, I forget what his name was, but he was all for justice, not for mercy. And so for every single crime that was committed, even just for stealing a slice of bread, you were put to death. And when asked about it, he said the smallest crime deserves death. And there is no other punishment greater than that, so all crimes receive the death penalty. But if you just completely allowed everyone to go unpunished for a crime, which would be, some would say would be mercy, you'd have chaos, you'd have anarchy. So justice and mercy are actually from one and the same. We just separate the two in order to talk about or focus on a particular aspect. And it's the same thing with God. He has the one act, and from it we receive what we call love, what we call justice, what we call mercy, what we call power, what we call knowledge, all of these different things, but it's one act. Now, going back to what I mentioned in my argument in my previous video, I also made the claim that this being would exist outside of time because he is the source of time. Now, time is a measurement of change. And since God exists outside of that, he exists outside of change. He does not change. So why does it appear that he has changed? Or how can he do an act? Because to move from an inaction to an action is a change. Well, we're stuck in that time stream. Imagine for yourself, we're a fish in a river, and God is a man who sticks his hand into that river, and all we can see is the fingers. Well, we encounter the very first finger, and we see that as one unique individual act. And then we encounter the second finger, and we think of that as a second individual unique act. That the man put one finger in, took it out, and then put it back in again. When in actuality, it was just one single act for both of those fingers. In the same way, God did one act that we observe as the beginning and different interactions throughout time and space, and then finally at the end, if there is an end, and we call them different acts when in reality they're just one act. And since they're all one act, they would have to be consistent with each other. Just like the different fingers coming in are consistent with each other at once, so too would be the act of God. And so because of not only is he outside of time, but because of the one act, doesn't change. We might perceive it as change, but it isn't change. Finally, the last point I kind of want to point out to you, or make, since God is the source of everything, is he the source of evil? Well, in order to answer that, we would need to first define exactly what is evil. Now, most philosophers who accept there being an actual good, you have some who don't accept even a good, like Nietzsche. He talks about good and useful, but there isn't like good or bad or evil. It's just useful, not useful. But all of the philosophers who accept a good-evil paradigm, that there is like inherently good acts that should be done because they are good, agree that evil isn't necessarily a thing. It's just an act has goodness or a lack of goodness, and when it has that lack of goodness, it's an evil. So when God, because God is the source of everything, he can only be the source of things that exist. Evil technically doesn't exist. It only exists insofar as there isn't, as it's a lack of something else. In much the same way as scientists would say darkness doesn't exist, but it is the lack of something that does exist. Now, before people start bringing up scripture quotes that seem to debunk this, we're not bringing in scripture yet. That I will try to address those issues in the next video. All I wanted to do was, from this perspective of a being of pure existence that exists outside of time and space, what can we know about him? Unfortunately, the answer is not a whole lot, but there are certain things that we can know, and to see how they would fit into reality. And because these are things that we observe, the Catholic Church, whenever it encounters these difficult readings in the scripture, uses these observations to help in the reading of it. But I hope this video helped out in clearing up some of the ways that people talk about God, or what they say God is. Hope to see you next time, and enjoy your day.